We start off with our high-class escort, Natalie, going to her client's room, and we waste no time. The gentleman finishes up a business call, and he walks around in a giant adult baby diaper. Natalie takes off her coat and drinks her stiff drink before getting down to business. Natalie keeps pretending to be his mommy, and she smacks him around while telling him all of the fake privileges she's taking away from him. When it's all over, the man goes back to his normal demeanor, and he offers for her to stay and watch some HBO with him. After finding out that he wouldn't pay her more for it, she decides to just go home. On the ride home, Natalie takes off her wig and seems to contemplate life as the taxi drives through the bustling city. Meanwhile, Mitch is waiting for the bus, and he calls his friend to tell him that he's running late, but he's on his way. When he gets to dinner, he finds that his friends are trying to set him up with their friend who's really stretching to find something in common. That's the worst encounter ever, just stop trying. If anything, let's just finish our drinks and dinner and go on with our lives. Mitch tries to compliment Corinne, but when she talks about how bad the film industry is for using sex to sell their movies, Mitch decides to run to the bathroom to spend a little time alone. And when I say alone time, I mean to take care of something that Corinne was hoping to help with later. The poor bathroom attendant standing right outside the door. But his professionalism should be commended. He knows what's going on, but it's not his job to worry about it. Nice. Mitch's friend JP comes in and tries to tell him that he should be out there talking to Corinne instead of in the bathroom rubbing one out. Then he finds out that Mitch is on a hookup app, and he ends up dipping when he gets a match. The next day, Mitch chills at home and he winds up making yet another match. He heads to the woman's apartment and gets it on. Over time, Mitch keeps making meaningless connections through the app, and he meets up with women during different times in his days. One night, Mitch manages to run into Natalie at the bar, and they manage to connect over small talk. At first, he thought she was the girl he was meeting from the app, but when he finds out that she's an escort, whatever connection they immediately had flies out the window. The next day, Mitch heads to work and quickly finds out that he's being fired. What's interesting is that his boss gives him the oddest and most truthful reasoning. He admits that Mitch is the best journalist, but he's the only one he can fire without some sort of discrimination lawsuit coming his way. Go figure. That night, Mitch contemplates his life as he hooks up with more women from the app, and the next day he goes to JP's office to meet for lunch. While he's there, JP tries to convince him to take this time to get some help, but Mitch decides to go on a job hunt through the city. It's completely pointless. But when he gets turned away from a publication that's not his usual style, he manages to convince her to just give him a shot. Later that day, Mitch comes up with the idea for his big article to be about local high-end escorts. He goes to the same bar as before to ask for Natalie, and the bartender tries to get him to pop a ball out to prove he's not a cop. After refusing, he walks out and runs into her anyway. He tries to tell her his big idea for using her as a story, but she refuses. After Natalie goes upstairs to meet a client, he breaks some of the rules, and she runs out after kneeling him in his junk. When she gets home, she tells her roommate that she can't do this anymore. Her roommate tries to recruit her for her pimp, but Natalie says that makes things feel too real. Instead, she thinks about Mitch's proposition earlier, and she calls to meet him the next day. She brings him along for a morning appointment that turns out to be a 10-year-old boy. Before anyone gets all up in arms about inappropriate content, hold your darn horses. She's tutoring him. Math. She's sitting at a dining room table with a workbook, cookies, and milk. Gutter minds. When they go back to town, Mitch tries to ask her some questions, but she just wants to keep this as a friendly thing instead of an interview. She takes him back to her apartment, and she introduces him to Dana and Dominic. After a very friendly introduction, Mitch heads to Natalie's room to try and figure out how she got into the business to begin with. She explains that she jumped into this job to pay off her student loans, and she tries to ask him more about who he is. He gives her the basic boring news, and she gets ready for her nighttime client. After giving him a makeover and pep talk on the rules of being her protection, she gives her client a night to remember with Mitch just waiting outside the door. Sound effects from that hotel room are kind of disturbing. If I didn't know any better, I'd say that Natalie was just on the other side of the door just making up all sorts of sounds to make Mitch think that she's actually doing it. It felt really weird. Later, she tells him that she gets rave reviews with her fake climaxing. After the night's done, they seem to get along great, but one night, Natalie has to have Mitch step in to stop a rowdy man at the bar. Now it becomes clear that she's using him as protection, but she points out that they're just getting what they want from each other. Just then, Mitch gets a ping on his hookup app, and he leaves to meet the match. What he doesn't know is that Natalie's following him, and she follows him to the bathroom of a bar where she spots him giving it to his match. When she comes out, she applauds his performance, and she finds out about the app. After talking about mutual STD scares they've had, Mitch asks Natalie to come with him to meet his family that weekend. Wait, what just happened? All of a sudden he's going to go with his weird infatuation instincts? He plays it off as she's just a cover, but I have noticed that he starts thinking kind of deep and emotionally after he meets up with matches from the phone. Go figure. The next day, Mitch goes out to eat lunch with JP, and he gives him an inside scoop on his article. JP is kind of mind-blown about the topic, but it does make sense for Mitch. Later, Mitch and Natalie go to his house to meet his sister and father. When Em meets Natalie, she's completely blown away by her beauty, and when Charles starts to put Mitch down, Natalie immediately jumps to his defense. She winds up making quite the impression on the family, but eventually Mitch sits down with Charles in his office to ask for help on rent again. Natalie listens from outside the door and she listens to Mitch begging for his father to help. Charles tells him that he would if he could, but his astrologist told him to freeze his accounts. Do you know how weird it is to see Bruce Campbell, Ash from Evil Dead, talking about Mercury retrograde? I mean, I know Bruce does all sorts of roles and characters, but it just felt funny. I loved it. Mitch and Natalie go to drop off Em at one of her friends' houses, and Mitch gives Natalie a chance to get out and go home. She decides that she wants to drink some wine back at his family's house, and he asks her what really got her into the escort business. She explains that she made a PowerPoint presentation when she was in college about all of the guys she had slept with, and that apparently made it very hard to get a job. Just then, Mitch gets a text from Em asking for them to pick her up since the other kids are making fun of her, and Natalie goes to the door to set her friends straight. She winds up going to the wrong house and she sets straight a little 5-year-old girl. Why is this little girl answering the door at night anyways? I bet you won't do that again. Later, Natalie, Em, and Mitch go home to watch an old movie, and Natalie assures Em that she has nothing to worry about. After some time, Em falls asleep, and Mitch offers Natalie his bedroom upstairs. To keep up the appearance of them dating, Natalie tells him to just come sleep in the room with her. Obviously, that goes the way we all saw coming. They get it on. Now I can only imagine that things are going to get a little complicated. The next day, Natalie drops Mitch off at his apartment, and she lends him money for his rent. His phone goes off with hookup matches while he asks Natalie what she's doing now, and she tells him that she's headed to the clinic for her regular STD check. While she goes to the clinic, Mitch meets up with a girl, but he has a change of heart and walks out. In time, he winds up at the clinic with Natalie, and he waits with her in the waiting room. Later, Mitch meets up with JP to help him put a desk together. But he gets upset when JP just points out all of the problems about talking to Natalie. Later, Mitch keeps helping Natalie as her bodyguard, and one day he comes home to find JP and his family waiting to have an intervention. Interventions legitimately scare me, and I don't think this is really the best idea. I mean, JP couldn't even get enough people to show up to support him, so he grabbed Mitch's landlord. Then when the landlord finds out that they're there because Mitch is addicted to sex, he gets confused and wonders why they think that's a bad thing. Mitch winds up walking out after telling his father and JP how they're never there for him either, and that night, Natalie calls him out for his depressed attitude. Mitch tries to tell her that there's nothing wrong, but when he sees a guy start to get handsy with her, he grabs the guy and beats him up on the bar floor. After getting kicked out of the bar, Mitch heads home to sulk, and Natalie barges in to confront him. He throws out there that she's an escort because she likes to control, and she can at least get paid for doing the thing she was shamed for in college. Then she points out that Mitch isn't a sex addict, he's just an emotionally crippled child that uses sex as a crutch. Wow, they're both brutally honest. But they do both get credit for actually calling out the real problems behind their messed up lives. Don't you love when movies call out characters for problems and you feel personally attacked? Not me, I don't have a problem. Well, Natalie storms out of Mitch's apartment, and life goes on as usual for the two of them. Mitch starts working on his article about Natalie, and she goes back to meeting clients on her own. Eventually, Mitch goes to the editor to tell her that he can't write the great story he promised her, and he thanks her for the opportunity. On his way out, she tells him she can see he lost the drive he had before, and she tells him to go back to the heart of what inspired him in the first place. That night, Mitch heads to the bar that Natalie meets clients in, and he goes to her hotel room to get some alone time. He locks out her client so he can talk to her, and he immediately spills his heart out to her. Well, she decides to tell him off as she goes back to work. Mitch heads home to look over pictures of Natalie and him, and he writes the most inspired piece of work he's ever written. This is an odd rom-com kind of movie. It got weirdly sentimental. I mean, even for a classic rom-com movie. This got almost realistically emotional. I mean, Natalie goes to a school for an interview to get into the master's program, and she gets accepted as a way to fight back against cyberbullying. This got weirdly inspiring. Don't get me wrong, it's still a rom-com about sex, but there's more to it than that. Mitch heads back to his family's home and he goes to talk to Charles. Charles tells Mitch that the article's phenomenal, and he asks about what happened to Natalie. When Mitch tells him that he messed all of that up, Charles tells him he needs to unmess it up, otherwise he'll live a life of regret. Later, while they eat lunch, Natalie shows up, and she tells Mitch that he misquoted her. When she tells him what she would really say now, she shows that she really does have feelings for him, and she actually quit the escort life. She tells him that she's been accepted into an MBA program, and Mitch couldn't be happier for her. Of course, he kisses her passionately in front of his dad and sister. Because love, right? Then the credits roll. I said it earlier in the movie, it's a sex rom-com movie, but there's a sort of realism to it that definitely isn't there in movies like American Pie and similar movies. I thoroughly enjoyed this and laughed out loud quite a few times. Give it a shot. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more like this one. Comment what you think I should watch next, and I'll see you in the next video.